This is exactly how I trained my brain to love doing hard things. When I was in my late teens, I found it incredibly difficult to concentrate. I had all these ADHD symptoms. I couldn't concentrate on tasks, terrible attention span, easily distracted, all of these things. I was able to figure out a way to rewire my brain to love doing hard things, to actually work towards my goals. I was someone who had very big, ambitious goals. However, I would do nothing about it. I just procrastinated and procrastinated and procrastinated. I could never focus on anything. I found out a way to rewire my brain so that I actually wanted to work towards my goals, and it's allowed me to achieve goals in time frames that seem difficult to comprehend. For example, this year I decided to start picking up running. I hadn't run more than 10Ks in my entire life coming into this year, and in the last 4 months, I've run 4 marathons. So if you're someone who really struggles with concentrating on tasks, you procrastinate a lot, you have big goals, but you're not really working towards them as quickly as you would like, you're not as consistent as you want to be, this is exactly how I rewired my brain to love working hard, so hopefully you can use this exact same tactic for yourself. The way that I rewired my brain to love doing hard things was through rewiring my dopamine, specifically how I got dopamine and how much dopamine I got from activities. So to understand this, we need to understand how our dopamine works. To understand how our dopamine works, you have to understand why we actually have dopamine in the first place. The big reason that we have dopamine is so that we can actually be rewarded for doing activities that are moving us towards our goals. So if you think historically, if you just killed an animal to feed your family, that would give you a huge amount of dopamine because you know, oh, I've just fed my entire family, I've just kept everyone alive. That was a really good thing to do. If you just invaded a tribe, took all their resources, took everything, not the most philanthropic work, but it would give you a lot of dopamine because you've just accumulated a bunch more resources, you've probably kept your family alive, expanded your territory, done good things, right? This gives you a huge amount of dopamine. Now there's lots of things that give you dopamine. For example, if I was sitting around the campfire with a bunch of friends cracking jokes, that's gonna give me a bit of dopamine as well. Probably not as much as killing an animal to feed my family and my tribe. The reason for that is that our brain knows that this is not as fulfilling. This is not keeping us alive. This is not the most fulfilling activity that you can possibly do. If we think about our dopamine on this continuum, this effort to reward continuum, if we think about the activity like killing an animal and feeding your tribe, that's going to sit up the top. That is something that produces a huge amount of dopamine, but it's also very challenging. At the same time, something like telling jokes around the campfire, okay, not as difficult, not going to give you as much dopamine because it is not as beneficial in your life. However, recently we have introduced something alien to our environment. This is online entertainment. So, what does online entertainment do? Where does it sit on this spectrum? Well, think about how difficult it is for you to scroll TikTok. Think about how difficult it is for you to play video games. Think about how difficult it is for you to watch Netflix. Right down here, a very, very easy, low effort thing to do. So you may think, well, if it's a low effort thing to do, then it has to sit down the bottom on the efforts to dopamine continuum. Wrong. It produces an insane amount of dopamine. If you sit down and scroll TikTok for an hour, your brain has just produced heroin levels of dopamine. Maybe not quite heroin levels, but a lot of dopamine, okay? It's sitting up here. It is sitting on the level of killing an animal and feeding your tribe, except you haven't moved off the couch. You've literally just swiped your finger up and down. So what does this mean? Well, this means, why would I do this, okay? This may not be killing an animal, but this might be working on your business. This might be working out, exercising, getting healthy, right? Doing things that are moving you towards your goals. This might be learning a new language. This could be a lot of things that are challenging, but are very rewarding, okay? Why on earth would I work out? Why on earth would I work on my business when I can do something that feels better and takes significantly less effort? I don't want to do that. Of course I don't want to do that because I constantly have this anchor of something that produces a huge amount of dopamine and is incredibly easy. The primary way that I rewired my brain to love working hard is I removed this stuff. I removed the anchor that made my brain always gravitate towards something easy that felt good. Now, the things that produce the most dopamine for me are things like working out. They're things like working on my business. They're things like learning the new language. They're things like running the marathon. They're the difficult things. They're the things that produce the most dopamine. They're the things that my brain is naturally gravitating towards. So what I did over the course of 6 to 8 months was I meticulously removed everything that was sitting up here on the dopamine to effort continuum, where it produces a bunch of dopamine but is not challenging. Removing all of this not only removed the anchor, but it also increased the amount of dopamine that I receive for these challenging activities. And I'll show you how that works. So another graph for you, you're welcome. This would be what your day looks like. Think of this time as over the course of a day from, let's say you wake up at 7 a.m. till 9 p.m., 10 p.m., okay? And this is the amount of dopamine that you're receiving over the course of the day. For most of us, for me, for example, before I removed the online entertainment, what would happen is I would wake up and within the first few moments, the first few waking moments of the day, I was instantly scrolling. I was instantly getting a spike of dopamine. And, you know, maybe I would start playing some video games and I would get more dopamine, a lot of dopamine. And maybe I had to actually do some work. Maybe I had to go to school or something. Well, you're still going to get some dopamine from going to school. It's like a challenging thing that is somewhat rewarding. You're around other people. It's going to produce some dopamine, not the same level of scrolling, not the same level of playing video games, but you're going to get something out of that, okay? Maybe a bit, right? But you get home and then what happens? Well, then maybe I want to start watching Netflix. Boom, another big spike of dopamine. And then maybe you do something that you shouldn't be doing before bed. Another big spike of dopamine, okay? And think about what's happened over the course of the day. You have just elevated your dopamine levels to incredibly high levels. However, you've done it. You've received all of this dopamine from doing degenerate, meaningless activities like scrolling, like playing video games, like watching Netflix, all of these things that in no way move you towards your goals, but these are the things that feel the best. Throughout the day, these are the things that you're training your brain to love, to want to do. But what happens when we've elevated our dopamine so much throughout the day? Well, what happens is, think about this as your average level of dopamine. Your average level of dopamine is up here, right? It's up at that high level. Now, our brain always wants our dopamine to be equilibrium. It wants it to be around this average range. It wants us to be in this normal range. But if your average is high, then what your brain has to do is downregulate your dopamine. It has to reduce the amount of dopamine that you're receiving from everything, from absolutely everything. So what happens is your brain needs to bring your dopamine down on average to baseline. But to do that, it means that everything is coming down. So now look what's happened. Think about that schoolwork that you were doing. Think about working on your business or working out, this little difficult thing that you did throughout the day. That is now significantly less enjoyable. That is now a task that you are going to dread. And these things, these dopamine spikes that you got, these are just now the new normal. Think about when you scroll a lot. Think about the first time you did it, you probably received a huge amount of dopamine. Or the first time you played video games, a huge amount of dopamine. The first time you watched Netflix, a huge amount of dopamine. But it just doesn't hit the same now, does it? It just doesn't feel the same. And that's because your brain has had to regulate your dopamine to be normal. It's brought your dopamine down for absolutely everything so that your average is in the normal range. What happens when you remove the online entertainment, when you remove the things that are off this dopamine spectrum, is that you remove the big spikes. And when you get rid of these big spikes, what happens is your day might look something like this, okay? So you wake up in the day and, oh, I don't scroll my phone straight away. Maybe I go for a walk. Ooh, I go for a walk and go for a little meditation. That actually feels quite good. Okay. And then I might get a deep work block done. Ooh, that feels quite enjoyable. And then, oh, maybe I might go and hit a workout. Wow, that actually feels really good. And then, well, maybe I'll do some more deep work and get that done. Great. Okay, and then I'm going to spend time with friends and great, and that feels really good as well. Look at your dopamine now. This looks very similar to the first case, except the difference is where you've received this dopamine. Whereas in the first situation, you're receiving these huge dopamine spikes from doing things that you don't want to do, that are not moving you towards your goals. You're receiving dopamine now from difficult activities. And at the start when you do this, it's all going to be down here because your dopamine levels are incredibly low. But over time, your brain is going to realize this guy's dopamine is too low right now. We need to bring it back to equilibrium, which means we need to bring up your dopamine for absolutely everything. So these activities that were once incredibly boring, incredibly tedious for you are now incredibly fun and incredibly enjoyable. And I'll give you a great example of this. I've started to learn Spanish, and the way I'm learning Spanish is through receiving input, receiving comprehensible input videos. These are basically dumbed down Spanish videos with some visual cues that I can understand so that I can learn Spanish. They're not super fun, they're not super enjoyable. However, because I'm not receiving any of this cheap dopamine, to me, this feels like Netflix. This feels like watching those YouTube videos. This feels like scrolling. This feels really good to me, except rather than just doing a meaningless, degenerate activity, I'm learning a new language. It feels so much better. My workouts feel so much better. The work that I do, I actually enjoy doing it because I'm receiving more dopamine from doing it. I'm going to tell you something right now that may blow your mind. I currently find it easier to run a marathon every single month, to work out every single day, to work on my business at least 5 hours a day, to spend 4 hours a day learning Spanish, to have a perfect diet. I find all of this significantly easier than I found it to spend 4 hours a week studying for university a few years ago. Think about how much more challenging theoretically it is to do what I'm currently doing than spending 4 hours a week studying for a university subject, yet I find it significantly easier and significantly more enjoyable. How is that possible? That is only possible because I've rewired my brain. I've rewired my dopamine system to actually enjoy doing difficult things. It all comes from removing the online entertainment, from removing that anchor of an easy thing to do that is incredibly enjoyable. Finding and receiving the dopamine from doing the things that are moving you towards the goals, the challenging things, the rewarding things, the things that are going to actually make you feel good and fulfilled in the long run. What I currently do seems hard, seems impossible for most people, but it is only hard, it is only impossible with the way that your brain is currently wired. Rewiring my brain has rewired my life. It has changed my life for the better, and it is hard to explain just how much this has done for me. Guys, I've removed online entertainment from my life for over 10 months now. If you want to learn how to do this yourself, but not only to do it yourself, but to do it yourself without requiring willpower whatsoever, then I have an entirely free community where I show you exactly what to do. I'll leave a link in the description below for that. If you liked the video, if you found it interesting, if you got some value out of it, then like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's probably a video somewhere around here that you might be interested in, so I will see you in one of those.